Hey, what's up friends? Baldwin here. Welcome back to the Speaker Lab YouTube channel, where today we're going to be doing a speech breakdown from Monica Lewinsky. Now, this is going to be a talk and a presentation that maybe you have not seen before. I had not seen that before, but probably like you, I was fairly familiar with the story, but she gives an interesting perspective of what it was actually like behind the story, what it was like to be on her end of this. And so I'm not sharing this from like a political standpoint at all, but more from she does some great things here, some great things that we can learn from, several things that she could tweak and improve on, but telling a story, being emotional with the story, leaning into that. We also talk about practice preparation, whether or not you should use notes or not. So there's lots we can get to, lots we can learn from. So let's jump right in. Enjoy this speech breakdown with Monica Lewinsky.
You're looking at a woman who was publicly silent for a decade. Obviously, that's changed, but only recently. It was several months ago that I gave my very first major public talk at the Forbes 30 Under 30 Summit. 1,500 brilliant people, all under the age of 30. That meant that in 1998, the oldest among the group were only 14, and the youngest just 4. I joked with them that some might only have heard of me from rap songs.
Okay, so let's talk about the podium that she's got there. Is it a podium or a lectern? I never remember. I am typically not a big fan of this for a couple of reasons. One is it looks like she's probably got a script there that she is going to be referring to. Even what she has said so far has felt very, very scripted. And so there's a balance there, and like having something that's very polished and very scripted and it not feeling robotic, right? You still want the audience to feel like, wow, this person, the speaker's really present, they're really engaged, they're really locked in with us in this room, versus they're just reciting something from memory, right? And so having that there in that kind of form, it almost makes it feel a bit like it's a script, a manuscript that she's reciting there. The other thing too is that by having that there, it creates a literal physical barrier between you and the audience. And so if you're going to have it, then it may be something that you just want to have off to the side. So oftentimes when I've given keynote presentations, and let's say they have something like that in the middle of the stage for other speakers, I will ask if they can move it to one side or the other, if it's on wheels or easily movable, just for my presentation, and then they can move it back. If they can't do that, then I will move from one side of it to the other and kind of work my way around it rather than just standing behind it, because again, it creates kind of this not necessarily even artificial, but real barrier between you and the audience. So that's definitely something you want to try to avoid.
Yes, I'm in rap songs. Almost 40 rap songs. But the night of my speech, a surprising thing happened. At the age of 41, I was hit on by a 27-year-old guy. I know, right? He was charming, and I was flattered, and I declined. You know what his unsuccessful pickup line was? He could make me feel 22 again.
Didn't know where that was going to go.
I realized later that night, I'm probably the only person over 40 who does not want to be 22 again. At the age of 22.
Now, good job there with that moment of it's a lighthearted laugh, joke about obviously the elephant in the room. And so then a couple people start applauding and just allowing the audience to respond to that, right? Not having to continue on or to kind of like plow through it, but just to stop and allow them to applaud and just kind of have a laugh/applause break there. So she handled that well.
I fell in love with my boss. And at the age of 24, I learned the devastating consequences. Can I see a show of hands of anyone here who didn't make a mistake or do something they regretted at 22? Yep, that's what I thought. So like me at 22.
Now, she did probably the opposite there in terms of her phrasing of what I might recommend is you want the audience to engage with you, right? And so you want them to be able to raise their hand. So you want to phrase the question in a way that that gives people the chance to raise their hand. When nobody raises their hand, then there's really no interaction there, right? She says a question, nobody responds to it physically, and that's the point, but it's also like, it's counterproductive to what she wants them to be able to do. You also, I don't know if you saw, the way the question was worded almost sounded a little bit confusing. So I noticed a couple of people who raised their hand and then immediately put their hand back down. So what she probably could have worded it as a 22-year-old, how many of you did something that you would have regretted, right? And most people, probably everybody would have put their hand up there, right? Which is what you want. You want everyone to put their hand up. You want everyone to be engaged. And so asking it the opposite way creates a little bit of confusion there.
A few of you may have also taken wrong turns and fallen in love with the wrong person, maybe even your boss. Unlike me, though, your boss probably wasn't the President of the United States of America. Of course, life is full of surprises. Not a day goes by that I'm not reminded of my mistake, and I regret that mistake deeply. In 1998,
so notice there, like she finishes her statement and then she looks down for her next line or her next bullet point there. And so there are, it's okay to a degree, but the less you can depend on notes, the less you can have notes there, the more powerful, the more effective and more connected your talk will feel versus like you're just having to refer back or look back. So a way to think about this would be, if someone were to ask me, Grant, tell me about whenever you proposed to your wife. If my response was like, oh man, I would love to, I don't have my notes with me right now, or I don't have my slides, so I can't. It's probably gonna be like, really? Like, you were there, you lived it, right? So it should be able to, oh, I can totally tell you that story right now. And it makes it feel much more real and raw and authentic. Now, I could certainly take the time to sit down, think through, okay, if I were to really think through the moment, that moment and that experience and, you know, what I said and how she reacted and all that stuff, then it could probably become a much better story, but I could still tell that story without necessarily having to have notes. So, in this case, again, the less she can use notes, I'm not poo-pooing anyone that needs to use notes, but the less you can use notes, the less you can refer to a script, the better.
After having been swept up into an improbable romance, I was then swept up into the eye of a political, legal, and media maelstrom like we had never seen before. Remember, just a few years earlier, news was consumed from just 3 places: reading a newspaper or magazine, listening to the radio, or watching television. That was it. But that wasn't my fate. Instead, this scandal was brought to you by the digital revolution. That meant we could access all the information we wanted, when we wanted it, anytime, anywhere. And when the story broke in January 1998, it broke online. It was the first time the traditional news was usurped by the internet for a major news story. A click that reverberated around the world. What that meant for me personally was that overnight, I went from being a completely private figure to a publicly humiliated one worldwide. I was patient zero of losing a personal reputation on a global scale almost instantaneously. This rush to judgment enabled by technology led to mobs of virtual stone throwers. Granted, it was before social media, but people could still comment online, email stories, and of course, email cruel jokes. News sources plastered photos of me all over to sell newspapers, banner ads online, and to keep people tuned to the TV. Do you recall a particular image of me, say, wearing a beret? Now, I admit I made mistakes, especially wearing that beret. But the attention and judgment that I received, not the story, but that I personally received, was unprecedented. I was branded as a tramp, tart, slut, whore, bimbo, and of course, that woman. I was seen by many, but actually known by few. And I get it. It was easy to forget that that woman was dimensional, had a soul, and was once unbroken. When this happened to me 17 years ago, there was no name for it. Now we call it cyberbullying and online harassment. Today, I want to share some of my experience with you, talk about how that experience has helped shape my cultural observations, and how I hope my past experience can lead to a change that results in less suffering for others. In 1998, I lost my reputation and my dignity. I lost almost everything, and I almost lost my life. Let me paint a picture for you. It is September of 1998. I'm sitting in a windowless office room inside the office of the Independent Counsel, underneath humming fluorescent lights. I'm listening to the sound of my voice on surreptitiously taped phone calls that a supposed friend had made the year before. I'm here because I've been legally required to personally authenticate all 20 hours of taped conversation.
Now, I like what she's doing here. A couple things. One is she's really slowing down to tell the story, right? So it's not something that she's just kind of, well, you guys kind of understand the story, you understand what happened, and we're just going to move on. So she's really slowing down and telling it in in incredible detail. Because again, this is one of those unique situations where everybody in the room already knows the story, right? But her giving it from the perspective of, you don't actually know the full story, or you don't know what it was like to be in my shoes as part of the story. And so coming at it from that perspective of, here's what it was actually like. Put yourself in my shoes of what it would be like to sit in this room and listen to these probably gut-wrenching conversations that were secretly recorded, and then having to say, yeah, that was me, or yeah, that actually happened, or whatever. So I like what she's doing here. It's just, this is really, really difficult for her to be able to do. So huge props and huge kudos to her for sharing it in this way.
For the past 8 months, the mysterious content of these tapes has hung like the sword of Damocles over my head. I mean, who can remember what they said a year ago? Scared and mortified, I listen. Listen as I prattle on about the flotsam and jetsam of the day. Listen as I confess my love for the president and, of course, my heartbreak. Listen to my sometimes catty, sometimes churlish, sometimes silly self being cruel, unforgiving, uncouth. Listen deeply, deeply ashamed to the worst version of myself, a self I don't even recognize. A few days later, the Starr report is released to Congress, and all of those tapes and transcripts, those stolen words, form a part of it. That people can read the transcripts is horrific enough. But a few weeks later, the audio tapes are aired on TV and significant portions made available online. The public humiliation was excruciating. Life was almost unbearable. This was not something that happened with regularity back then in 1998. And by this, I mean the stealing of people's private words, actions, conversations, or photos, and then making them public. Public without consent, public without context, and public without compassion. Fast forward 12 years to 2010, and now social media has been born. The landscape has sadly become much more populated with instances like mine, whether or not someone actually made a mistake, and now it's for both public and private people. The consequences for some have become dire, very dire. I was on the phone with my mom in September of 2010, and we were talking about the news of a young college freshman from Rutgers University named Tyler Clementi. Sweet, sensitive, creative Tyler was secretly webcammed by his roommate while being intimate with another man. When the online world learned of this incident, the ridicule and cyberbullying ignited. A few days later, Tyler jumped from the George Washington Bridge to his death. He was 18. My mom was beside herself about what happened to Tyler and his family, and she was gutted with pain in a way that I just couldn't quite understand. And then eventually I realized she was reliving 1998, reliving a time when she sat by my bed every night. Reliving a time when she made me shower with the bathroom door open. And reliving a time when both of my parents feared that I would be humiliated to death, literally.
Okay, so let's say that you're telling some type of story that's a very personal, raw story, and it causes you to get a little emotional. So a good thing, a bad thing, indifferent. I personally think it's a really good thing, because one of the things you always want to remember is that you are a human talking to a collection of other humans, right? And so even though we may have never experienced anything like what she has gone through and what she has experienced, we've all had really, really bad stretches of life, right? Or really bad days, or days where maybe we've questioned whether or not it's worth it, or maybe we've wondered, why am I here, or what's the point of all of this? And so maybe we've had those type of moments. So as she's talking about it, we maybe find ourselves going like, yeah, I to a very, very different / small degree, I get it. So if she was just very robotic and like, yeah, it was very difficult, then we're just kind of like, it's gotta be more than that. But the way she's talking about and describing it makes it feel like, wow, it makes it that much more real and powerful. So when you're sharing something and you get a little emotional, I think that's okay. Now there is certainly a line where, let's say she just emotionally is falling apart and she's crying a lot, and to the point where it almost becomes a distraction. You don't want to get to that point. And if you feel like I can't tell the story without sobbing uncontrollably for several minutes, you probably shouldn't tell the story. But if it's something where it's like, yeah, I'm going to get choked up a little bit, I think that's okay. So again, be comfortable to lean into that.
Today, too many parents haven't had the chance to step in and rescue their loved ones. Too many have learned of their child's suffering and humiliation after it was too late. Tyler's tragic, senseless death was a turning point for me. It served to recontextualize my experiences, and I then began to look at the world of humiliation and bullying around me and see something different. In 1998, we had no way of knowing where this brave new technology called the internet would take us. Since then, it has connected people in unimaginable ways, joining lost siblings, saving lives, launching revolutions. But the darkness, cyberbullying, and slut-shaming that I experienced had mushroomed. Every day online, people, especially young people who are not developmentally equipped to handle this, are so abused and humiliated that they can't imagine living to the next day. And some, tragically, don't. And there's nothing virtual about that. Childline, a UK nonprofit that's focused on helping young people on various issues, released a staggering statistic late last year. From 2012 to 2013, there was an 87% increase in calls and emails related to cyberbullying. A meta-analysis done out of the Netherlands showed that for the first time, cyberbullying was leading to suicidal ideations more significant.
So again, let's go back to one of the things we touched on at the beginning. Have you noticed the number of times that she's looked down at her notes, she's kind of been reading the next line? If you were to ask her, if you were just to, sit down with her for dinner at a coffee shop or something and like, hey, what was it like going through, the experience back in 1998 from your perspective? Or what has that taught you about cyberbullying today? I think what she would share would be a lot of the same things. It may not seem as polished, but it would feel much more human. And so again, the more scripted something is, the less human it feels. And so the way that you can kind of combat that is in your preparation, in your rehearsal. Now I still understand that a lot of speakers are like, okay, I'm really prepared, I'm really rehearsed, but what if I get a few minutes into this and I just completely have a brain fart, I completely lose track of where I am? What do I do at that point? So I totally get that. So maybe the type of thing where instead of having a full all of her notes there, maybe she just has a couple of key words, maybe just even on a note card, or perhaps in front there on a confidence monitor, just a couple of key words there, just enough to keep her on track. So something like that, where it's like, I just have a couple of key things, a couple of key phrases to keep me going. The other thing to remember is that as a speaker, nobody else has what she's looking at. Nobody else has the notes, nobody else has the script, nobody has any idea what comes next here. So if she forgets something, if she does something out of order, if she flubs something up, as an audience member, we have no clue. It's not like we're reading along the script with her and we're like, ooh, wait, she just said that line and she meant to say this line. We don't have that. So if she messes something up, it's not a mess up to anybody else. And so that's okay. So it should give you a little bit of permission, where I know for me as a speaker, there's been times where I've come off stage and like, I totally forgot to tell this story. I just didn't tell it. But the audience knows no different, because they didn't know that I was supposed to be telling that story, or that I was planning on telling that story. So from that standpoint, again, one of the best things you can do is really spend some time practicing, rehearsing, preparing, so you feel less of a need to have notes or a script there in front of you. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that speech breakdown. Some powerful stuff that she is sharing in there. If you'd like to see more of that video, we'll be sure and include the link below. Hey, if you like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Let us know what is one thing that you learned that you're going to be applying to your next talk or presentation. And then finally, don't forget to like the video. All right, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll talk to you next time. You're awesome.